Are recording. We are broadcasting, so just keep an eye on our attendees list here.
Okay, welcome to the planning board meeting for March 1st, 2023. I'd like to start with a roll call for the planning board members. Alden Clark. Here. Jeff Belisle is not here yet. Bob Cope is not here yet. Amy Pennington.
Here.
Heather Rogers.
Here.
Don Walters.
Here.
Richard Yeager.
Here.
Here. So we have a quorum. On our meeting agenda tonight, we have 3 joint public hearings with the Planning and Development Committee and Committee of the Whole. Then we have a public hearing on Hale Business Park at 21 Malcolm White Road. And then under general business, we have a request for release of covenant at Extra Lane and 2 requests for extension of prior approvals at 17 Malcolm White Road and 3 Stanley Tucker Drive. And improvements and other updates for the chair. So I will turn this over to the chair of the Planning and Development Committee to open their portion of the public hearing.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Ed Cameron, and I'm the chair of the City Council Budget. That was a couple of years ago. Not Budget Finance, Planning and Development Committee. And I'm joined by Councilor Wright Mark, who was Mark Wright. And we are 2 of the members, and we're joined remotely by Councilor Preston. Two of the items that we'll be discussing have also been posted as committee of the whole. These are the 2 ordinances related to the planning board membership. So we have other councilors who are also joining us remotely, and they'll be allowed to speak if they can speak during that session. And we will also hear from Councilor McFauley, who's the sponsor of the first ordinance that will be amended, suggested amended zoning ordinance that we'll be talking about, and Councilor Khan is also there. So that's it. So I think that follow our city council portion of the joint hearing to order.
Thank you. So I guess we begin with Councilor McCullough, presenting the proposed amendment to the city code to remove the allowance of ITIF special permits for residential use. Councilor McCullough.
Thank you, Chair. This is ordinance 135, and it's a follow-up to some conversations that the planning board had that I was privy to regarding Market Street. And in that, what we found is that the original intent of adding residential to this was open to too much interpretation. And I think it went beyond the intent of the original document, right? And so my attempt here is to tighten up this tighten this up so that there's less pressure on the planning board to offer a creative solution after the fact. And I think that just removing residential from this discussion, I think commercial is very valid, but just removing residential from this part of the discussion is cleaner. And I think it is more along the lines of the intent, which is not to subsidize any residential development without parking. We know that regardless of if anyone pays into the ITIF, they don't get a spot, and we don't create more spots. It's just a, if you will, a bit of a penalty to help ease the pain at the time. So my intent was to cover just residential uses going forward, to remove that from options within this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Before I open this up to the public hearing, I'd like to ask if any of the planning board members or members of the planning and development committee have any questions or comments about this proposed amendment.
Yeah, just one question, just for my, on education, I'm just wondering, is there an accounting for how the, funds are spent on the ITIF funds? Does that go towards offsetting the funding on the garage, or is it just improvements to the lot and maintenance of the lot, that kind of thing?
The planning director, I don't get involved in that detail, but my understanding is that it covers, or it can cover both bonding for the garage, one substantial, expenditure there from that account as the construction. But also to supplement the downtown program. So out of that downtown program, the garage is being paid for. I don't know how that picture is dealt with that after for the finance director, though. I don't know what's the numbers.
I believe it goes into the paid parking fund.
I also have a question, in terms of, is there any cap as to how many of these could be allocated? I know that they're not designated spaces in the garage per se, but is there any sort of recognition to the flow would look like this with this many of these being given? And is there a cap to, okay, now we've extended this beyond the point where this is not reasonable?
There isn't the cap in the zoning here, and maybe this is one of those things I think the council and the planning board may revisit periodically or over time, depending on what's seen. But the ordinance today does not include a cap. Whether or not the council wants to, add one, or we can certainly discuss that aspect here. But there isn't anything in zoning, and I'm not aware of anything on the other end here. The conflict mainly about the fact that residential parking overnight is restricted in these lodging facilities in such a manner that it might become a problem for allowing special permits for the use of those lodging residential purposes.
Just one more question about that. So is the thought to, like, if it's not designated parking per se, is there any thought to, well, if let's say 16 of these permits are given, we understand that the usage would look like X, in other words, like so many cars would go in and out on a flow, and therefore really only occupying 6 spots generally. Keep track of things like that in this?
The parking clerk does, they do keep track as best they can of who's parking there. I think it's of course things like that. I don't know that they have that fine grain of information. Looking at for our parking clerk and his staff, but I don't think they have that fine grain for that particular area of information. It may be possible for them to collect data like that, but I don't know that we have that presently.
Okay.
So I think that so I think we all have to keep in mind that this is a payment into a fund that doesn't guarantee you a spot in the garage or anywhere in the parking system. So so placing a cap on it is really arbitrary, because there's no requirement to park in the garage if you pay into this fund. You're still in the wild, you're parking wherever you can. So so that's something to keep in mind, that this, with the funds that are generated from this, don't have a requirement, nor do they have a spot necessarily in the designated parking spot. So it's just money going into a fund to offset the expenses of the garage and the parking system in general.
One more question is, if a property is sold, does this deposit into the fund transfer into the sale, or is there another requirement for the new owner to then take on another set of deposits?
So the way that generally speaking it works is folks were grandfathered for uses at the time this ordinance was originally adopted. So any uses that were there based on what they needed. There are uses obviously in the downtown that don't have necessarily parking. They've relied on municipal parking, for instance, for a long time. So there was a grandfathering essentially for what was required for zoning for those uses, generally speaking, and it was basically such that on a go-forward basis, if you have the same parking requirements, status quo, but if you increase because of the change of use, let's say, and you have an increased demand for parking based on the change of use, you would then have to pay the incremental increase of what your parking demand is beyond what you're essentially grandfathered for, what you're providing. So it's incrementally added depending on the change in use. So we have our zoning administrator here tonight. You effectively have to look at the uses involved verify the parking, was acceptable, and then was in fact grandfathered for the use. And then add, the gap there would have to be paid for into this fund, and the special permit would have to be granted by the board.
I think just to follow up on that, if there's no change in the use, and the ownership changes, there's no additional fee.
Okay. Okay, so whatever happens now is going with the deed.
Yes.
to that person.
Right,
Okay.
right, yeah, there's no change of use, it's not an issue. If it's a change of use and it doesn't actually change the parking ratio or the, it's not an issue. It's only if they're increasing that need there.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments from the board or the planning and development committee?
Thank you. Yeah, I just, my recollection of this, and I've not had a chance to talk to Councilor McCauley about the intent of this, which I appreciate. I was one of the sponsors of the original ordinance in 2017, although I will claim 0.0001% brain power because this was Councilor Igerman's idea. And if memory serves me, this was prompted by situations where a new development or a new use was being proposed for a structure or parcel. And that developer was able to claim access to, closeness to municipal parking in order to just, fulfill their parking requirements. What is now known as the Black Cow was I think the ale house. And it was a new 400-seat restaurant where it had been like auto parts place there, and turned out to be a fabulous restaurant, I think. So they're quite often, but that caused quite a bit of stir, and I think there was fear that if other types of commercial use were brought in and they just claimed, either the garage that was being proposed or other municipal parking is covering their own parking requirement, and then we were going to be kind of jammed up with, just in terms of not having parking. So at least having this fund created gave an allowance that would kick in some money for the city to do as it needed through the big parking program to find other uses, maybe that would buying other surface slots or creating additional parking. So that's sort of the proposal. But I don't recall a lot of conversation about the residential piece here. So we'll talk about this certainly with the planning and development committee after this joint hearing, and we can get some more information. I'd be curious exactly what, if anything, has gone into this fund. But for me, from a kind of a more strategic 30,000 foot level, I want to not pivot residential downtown. I think we could use more people there. I mean, we talk occasionally about growth, and growth promotes our own tax base, but we're a small city, not a lot of developable land, and also a place where we don't have a lot of year-round residents frequenting our shops in the wintertime, and so I'm somebody who, there's not a lot of parcels downtown that I think would be converted into larger residential uses, but there could be, and I would not want to just kind of stop that dead in its tracks. But so I think my question on this, and I don't know if this is Councilor McCauley or a member of the planning board or director of court, how would the world look different if this passed? So if I'm a developer and I want to put up 30 units of housing, and there's a couple of kind of less used parcels downtown, I suppose. Under this, I would, if this change went, well, right now, if I couldn't provide my own parking, I would pay into this fund, but if that option goes away, then I have to provide it all on site or make some other arrangements.
Correct. Yeah, you can demonstrate that parking is available in some way, but you'd have to provide it on a private basis as opposed to using the public parking lots or the zoning requirements.
So that was some things I'll be thinking through as we move forward. on
So,
this.
Chair, if I could respond to that as an answer. In your scenario, leaving 30 units of, let's say, parking for 30 units downtown, paying into this fund doesn't guarantee them a spot. They would still be parking on the street. And let me just remind you, there is no overnight parking in any of our municipal lots. I know we don't enforce that, but that is our rule. Our rules are there's no overnight parking in the garage except in the monthly spot. There's no overnight parking down in the former NRA lots. There's no overnight parking in the Green Street lot. And those are our rules. So what we've effectively done is thrown all of the parking while they paid for it. We've effectively thrown all the parking onto the neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Oh, Councilor Crescent.
Yes, thank you for recognizing me. So after hearing Councilor Cameron's comments, it sounds like we are extraordinarily like-minded on this, but I think what I heard was that this was a request from the planning board, and I'd like to hear from someone on the planning board as to why they're making this request in particular.
It hasn't come as a request from the planning board. Councilor McCauley had sponsored the amendment. However, there was a recent application for 2 to 6 Market Street where the issue was illustrated for folks here on the planning board, and Councilor McCauley had attended at least one of the nights of that hearing, where there was discussion about the fact that in this instance, the developer had originally proposed, if you're familiar with that new building down at the bottom of Merrimack Street, at the bottom of the Route 1 Bridge and Market Street. That building was originally proposed to have stacked parking and mechanical lifts. And the developer could come back after building the structure and indicated to the board that they would not be able to provide the lifts if they had not worked out, grading or slopes and so forth. While that was later revisited weeks and months later, and the developer agreed that they could in fact put the lifts, they had to make some adjustments, but they could in fact put the parking on site. What that pointed to and maybe caused some concern about, I'll defer to the planning board members or councilors as to their preferences or concerns. But the concern there in this particular instance was that the developer had proposed originally to provide all parking on site for the residential uses and utilize the ITIF special permit only for the commercial component. And then suddenly had said, I can't provide all the residential parking. I want to provide all of that parking by just paying into the fund, the 7,500 and CPI index increase. And so that I think sort of illustrated at least some of this issue, and I'll refer to others here, both planning board and city council, on visual interpretation of preferences as to what the policy should be.
So that in particular, that was the example that was in my mind as I'm thinking, I'm hearing the discussion. And to me, I certainly understand why we would want to make sure that something like the development at Waterfront West was not able to use this as relief. But at the same token, when we're talking about smaller developments like this, it seems to me like this is a perfect way to use the garage as relief for those sorts of things. But again, as Councilor Cameron said, we can have this discussion within our planning and development committee. I yield. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, by the way, for anybody who's using the microphones, it helps if you're really close to your mouth. Unfortunately, they don't work as well if they're far away.
So I think the it's important to recognize that there are two different things that regulate, I think it's been referred to. The ordinance itself relates to how much of what uses can be exempted from the parking by paying into the ITIM. But it's a separate issue, I think as Councilor Crowley said, as to whether anybody could actually park in the garage as a result of that. And I think that's a separate city council policy issue that's different from this particular issue relating to zoning. One question did come up today that I saw in an email about what residential means in this context. Because I guess the zoning ordinance lists a number of uses that are classified as residential that maybe we would maybe necessarily consider as non-residential. I think maybe the zoning officer might want to speak to that if that's, I think it was her point that was raised.
Hi, Jennifer Blanchet. I had just made the request for clarification within the language of the ordinance to clarify the intent. I think the intent was not to prohibit hotels, bed and breakfasts, and other such commercial uses under this residential category, despite the fact that they fall under the residential section of the use table. And Councilor Macaulay did confirm that it was the intent to only apply this residential label to single two multifamily, and then over 20 units, and I believe also in-law apartments. The others would all still be considered commercial and be viable for use in the ITIF.
So do you think that that could be clarified by using the words residential dwelling unit and somehow in those uses that would not be allowed to use this?
Perhaps, or to specifically just note the uses that are still available to it, or conversely, the ones that are intended to be excluded.
So in some way, we would need to amend this to be specific as to which units we're going to be.
Yes, I could. Per Jennifer's point, I tend to agree with that, that there's a distinction here, even though the zoning ordinance in the report lists under residential some of these other uses that are quite like really commercial in nature more than residential. We could add language that it doesn't necessarily be addressed on the floor here, but if there's agreement on that policy, or clarification, that it's consistent with the policy that is indicated by the proposed ordinance change, then we could essentially amend that, in committee, or at least prior to it being brought out on the floor by the city council to add in. I would suggest adding referencing these particular use categories, just no ambiguity whatsoever as to what a residential dwelling is, because sometimes we see sort of different interpretations. I would suggest it's listing off those uses either by number or by their titles.
Any more questions or comments before I open this up to the public hearing? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing. Please come forward, state your name, and let us know your thoughts.
Good evening, members of the board and city council. Lisa Mead, 13 Purchase Street. I'm here speaking as a resident, former elected official, and somebody who has some history with the parking in the downtown. For those who don't know, and I want a little bit of history here beyond what Councilor Cameron said. One of the reasons the zoning in the downtown works so well is because we have residential units mixed with commercial units. In fact, the downtown zoning is the envy of many, many communities across Massachusetts because it has an economic driver built into it. And many communities have tried to emulate that zoning. Before the change and addition of the ITIF, the basis of the zoning is that if you were within 300 feet of any municipal lot, regardless of the use, you could count that parking, because as you can imagine, when they recreated the downtown in urban renewal, all of the lots along State Street, none of them had footprints on their properties that included any parking. They had to use municipal lots for parking, otherwise they couldn't develop the lots, whether it was residential uses or commercial uses. And indeed, I was also involved in the permitting, or actually I didn't actually represent the applicant at the time, but the permitting of the what is now the Black Cow, which did generate a lot of concern about, well, wait a minute, if there's going to be a huge economic benefit to one particular entity by taking advantage of our municipal lots, they ought to help pay for those lots. It wasn't that they couldn't count them, but they ought to help pay for them, which ended up helping to be an economic driver for the parking garage. And that was all great and certainly understood by everyone. The way this is drafted, it would essentially freeze residential units in the downtown as they are today. And I don't think that's a good idea. And I'm going to give you an example. I'm not related to this project at all, I mean, to this property at all, but I happen to know, everybody knows the Arthur Page building on State Street. That business has been there for a really long time. What if that family decided to sell that building? What if whoever bought it said, well, it's a better economic deal for me long-term to have business on the first floor, which by the way is required, and turn the second 2 floors into apartments? They wouldn't be able to do that because they couldn't provide the parking to do that. And so you automatically limit the turnover and economic development. I would suggest to you that in fact, some of the reasons the turnover has slowed down in the city of Newburyport is because people have to think about the cost to pay into the ITIF if they come in with a more intense use in any of their floors in their buildings in the downtown. So that is what it is, but to prohibit by not allowing somebody to take advantage of the municipal lots in the downtown, residential development is actually turning back zoning without rezoning. And I think it's a big mistake. I would also caution you that all of those buildings down there are mostly mixed use. So I don't know what we're gaining here, because are they defined as mixed use or are they defined as single and twos? Well, first of all, you can't do a single or two family in the downtown. It's not allowed, right? And maybe you could do a multifamily, but you can't do a single or two. You certainly can do hotel, lodging house, rehabilitation residence, things like that. Hotel, I can tell you a couple of places would be perfect places on State Street for boutique hotels if the economy ever got in that position. But you couldn't do it if the zoning wasn't changed or made more specific. So if you eliminate 1 or 2 families, that doesn't get you anywhere because you're not allowed to have those anywhere in the downtown anyway. And then you're taking away multifamily, something the city desperately needs, because they'll need more parking and you won't let them park anywhere because you won't let them participate in the program. So I just think, and I concur with Councillor Cameron and Councillor Preston, that you all ought to really take a break here, because this isn't just about paying to play, so to speak, in the parking situation in the downtown. This is about the use and economic drivers of the commercial aspect of our downtown. And it's a much bigger picture than having too many people in the parking garage, which I would suggest to you is not an actuality on a regular basis. But it doesn't matter because it doesn't give somebody a right to park there, as everybody has acknowledged. But I really think this is a much, much bigger issue than just paying into the ITIF or special permit. To prohibit any additional residential parking essentially in the downtown would lock the current residential status of the downtown in place, period. And you can't take buildings down because you shouldn't, because they're historic buildings and now we have the DOD as well, right? So it's a really big picture. And frankly, I question whether or not the use is residential or it's mixed, right? We have a mixed use. If you are commercial and residential, then you're mixed use. You're not multifamily, you're not 2 family, you're not 1 family, you're a mixed use. That's the definition. So I would ask everybody to step back and take a look at this, because I don't think it actually accomplishes what perhaps the councilor wants to accomplish. Thank you very much.
Through the chair, if I could comment. Just one point, and I defer, I don't know if the zoning administrator wants to add anything to this, and it may be just recognizing, the comments were just made. A grandfather use may already have an allocation of parking that's associated with that use, and so it may not be, impossible or that as much of a burden as is being suggested to make a conversion of a use if that parking is basically being offset. the requirement for parking is being offset by something what is grandfather there, so, that's something worth considering, I guess.
But that's not what that's not what the ordinance says. You could do that, right? So if you say, let's say you have commercial use on the first and second floor and a residential use on the third floor today. And you want to change the second floor to a residential use. And you have enough parking where?
The question is what you've been grandfathered under zoning, which goes back to the original ITAF amendment that was adopted by the council. I don't know.
Right, to guarantee that parking. So the question is, does the commercial use have the same parking requirements for the residential use that you put on the second floor?
Jennifer, did you want to add? Do you want to speak to this?
If I could, it is a concern. I think there's been a bit of confusion on it. There is language in the existing ordinance that addressed the status of a property as it was in 2017, at the time that this ordinance was adopted. It says that the spaces for the uses that existed at that point, as best they can be determined on assessing records, would be grandfathered to that count, that intensity of use, as Attorney Mead suggested. So commercial spaces on the first floor have a more intensive parking requirement than residential uses. Right now, most of the buildings that we're discussing downtown that might be converted to a residential use on the upper floors are office uses that have a per square foot requirement of parking spaces, which in every analysis that I've done so far yields a higher parking count than would a residential parking requirement for, be it single, two, or multifamily. So everything I've seen that goes in that direction from commercial retreating back to residential has a lesser demand and therefore would not have an additional requirement, would not need to utilize the ITIF. So where there is a concern for new lots, as was suggested, these vacant parcels that might be developed, that's where this would have an impact. I don't believe it has the impact that's being suggested in the existing structures intended to be reutilized, such as the structure that's existed. I did have the opportunity to look at that one a few years ago when the owner came in and sort of asked. And unless they're doing really tiny units, you know, little single room units that have a really high demand, I don't think we're going to see the type of issue that's suggested except on undeveloped parcels. So, and even then, the mixed use would allow the commercial component to tap into the ITIF to make a payment into it, but they would under this amendment need to satisfy the residential component on site or in a private lot offsite. Thank you.
And if I could just wrap up, and that's my concern, right? So that's my concern. So until somebody does an analysis, you start at the top of State Street and go down and look at the number of buildings that potentially could have new uses that include significant residential uses, or any of the ones that are currently included that you may exclude: hotel inn, lodging house, in bed and breakfast. I think it's a big move to make quickly without a proper analysis of what the current parking requirements are and what the parking requirements could be if the top two floors or more could be changed into residential. I just think for the purpose of protecting the parking garage, you ought to just slow down and do a proper analysis on it.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public who wishes to be heard on this proposal? If not, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the board and the committee. Are there any comments at this point about how to move forward?
Since a request from the board was invoked, I don't know where the source of that was, but I can say as one member of the board, I would not be in favor of seeing these kind of additional parking restrictions. I'm newer to the board and seeing the ITIF, I've only seen it really in practice, I think on 2 applications. The one that was cited in some detail was actually resolved, so I think that's just kind of off the table. So for me, I would hate to see restriction on residential uses. I think Attorney Mead's points were very, very sound, so that's where I am, so just thought it'd be good for people to know.
Anyone else wish to comment? I guess I'll just say that my personal stance is I am always in favor of lower parking requirements, probably more than would be acceptable to anybody else in the city. I am for more flexibility rather than for less flexibility. I would like to see lower commercial parking requirements as well. That's probably not realistic in this environment. So, I guess I'm kind of persuaded by Attorney Mead that we should maybe step back and look at the impact, or what properties would be impacted by this. I do feel that probably most of the existing early 19th century properties along State Street would probably not be affected because, as Jennifer said, you'd be going from a higher parking requirement to a lower parking requirement by going from office to residential. But on the periphery and on scattered lots around the downtown, this could impact the ability of underutilized lots to be redeveloped. And there are a few, say, single-story buildings from the 50s or whatever that we'd probably like to have redeveloped, and we'd not like to have this as an obstacle to development. So I'm kind of tending toward either holding off until we have more information or being opposed to this.
I'd be interested to know just the number of entities that have participated in the ITIF and the timeframes since 2017. I think that would be informative for all of us to know. So if that's something you could maybe pass along to the finance director or something that you might know.
Sure, we can circle back on the details on those applications, really like less than 5, it's been just a handful. The Market Street application was one, and in Market Street one was another. But it's been a very small usage of that provision since it's adopted.
Yes, I'm surely not suggesting paralysis by analysis, but I do agree that a bit more analysis. And I would add, besides the existing structures we have, I think it would be formative to myself to understand that a couple of these vacant lots that we're talking about, because it's not obvious to me that there can be some form of development there. Perhaps it would not be as intense because there needs to be more square footage on the surface for parking, but nonetheless, that I think we're going to go through this analysis of existing. I think it may be worthwhile to also take a look at some of the vacant lots. If you just understand it, thank you.
Yeah, so for my part, I agree with what Mr. Wright said. I think getting a little bit more information would be important. And yeah, zoning is a place where we want to tread carefully because it's very hard to back out of it. Can be done, but I certainly think from a broad public policy perspective, I think we want more people downtown living there, visiting there, and there is limited space. And while I love the sentiment for lower parking requirements, and I know that's definitely a trend in planning across the country, and that makes a lot of sense to me in general, but in this specific instance, I'd like to be very careful. I know how controversial parking is downtown. I've got a few scars still from paid parking and garages and other related endeavors. But I appreciate Councilman Macaulay raising this, and I think that also I'd like to kind of loop back to any email or things that were written back in 2017 when we passed what we have before us today. second that would be useful. So I think for the council, I think we certainly have another, at least one more meeting on this and just try to kind of get the brass tacks and really understand what the change would do and if there's any unintended consequences, know that going in.
So here's what I would suggest for the planning board is to move on. I think it would be possible for the planning board to close the public hearing and to request, and not to take action, but to request further information, as we've talked about in terms of data on ITIF and some analysis of some of the lots downtown, just to get a sense of what the impact would be. And then put this off to a future meeting at which we could look at that data and then make a decision at that point. You think that would make sense, Andy?
I'll defer to Ed as a chair of the committee, I should know that the committee, but keep that in the committee as well, and I take that input prior to the committee providing a recommendation back to the council, so that your input could be taken down.
Right, I guess, yeah, I think you're going to continue it anyway.
Yeah, I think. I looked at my council colleagues here for any recommendations. I mean, if we closed our portion. And you don't close your portion, then I think that means we would have to meet again. Or we could close our portion, you close our portion, and the council committee just works it out. In a way
Sorry,
that-
Counselor Cameron, could I be recognized?
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, I know it's hard to see my hand raised. So firstly, I want to say thank you to those members that have offered an opinion on this. I mean, ultimately, I view the role as advisory to the administration and to the council, and your opinions are really important to us. So I appreciate those of you who have commented. One other bit of information, so following on to Councilor Wright and Councilor Cameron, I agree that more information helps us to make better decisions. So not only understanding whom has already paid into the ITIF, but also if we could get a listing of what those vacant lots are that could be developed. I mean, as I think about the downtown, it seems extraordinarily limited to me, but perhaps I'm very wrong on that. But so if we could just get some sort of listing of what vacant lots could be developed that would fall into this category, that would be helpful for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So procedurally, in terms of how to handle this, closing the joint hearing, the council committee could continue to work on this and just, bring it to the full council or not. Or, well, it would need to go to the full council, whether it's in favor of it or opposed, and just handle it that way, or if we kept the joint hearing open. I think we are trying to schedule for early April for a joint hearing.
The 19th, I think, for that new one.
The 19th. Yeah, so I don't know, we could go either way.
I think for the planning board, since we haven't had much more discussion for the planning board tonight, I think I would actually look for a motion, but I think we could probably close our hearing tonight, but not make our recommendation until the subsequent meeting. Because in order to get that information, just so we don't have to bring it back to a joint hearing again. And I think that putting it off to the 14th can be a long time. That work for you? Sure. So I guess what I would request is a motion, first of all, to close the public hearing for the planning board. And then a second motion to, we actually don't even need to have a second motion, we'll just continue the discussion. So yes, so Don, you're making a motion?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I'll call the roll then. Alden?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Don? Richard?
Yes.
And Rick, yes. So our public hearing is closed and we will bring this back to a future meeting.
So should we close our, side of the public hearing and, or with that?
Planning development committee has before, and situations like this has closed the public hearing, and then kept it in committee, for further analysis before bringing it out before. I'll refer to you as council as the committee chair, but that is one way that the committee has handled that before, recognizing that there might be further comment from the planning board, but also recognizing that the committee, before making the recommendation to the full council, like, one more time. So,
I'll move to close our portion of the public hearing.
Okay, is there a second on that, Council Preston?
Second,
Okay, any further discussion on that? I'll have a roll call, starting with P. Preston,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Cameron, yes. All right, so we'll close our portion of the public hearing. Thank you. And, should be continued.
Thank you. So the next two items on the joint public hearing are two related items, an amendment to the proposed amendment to the general code and a proposed zoning amendment, both of which relate to the number of members of the planning board. And this is something that we have proposed as the planning board in order to deal with a couple of issues. One is that we require a 2/3 vote on special permits under state law. And there could be situations where we have short members either because of vacancies or conflicts of interest, recusals, or board members that haven't been available for meetings. And so you don't want to get into a situation where an applicant is having a difficult time having enough members to vote actually on the application. So we're proposing these two ordinances would change the planning board makeup in the following ways. It would over time reduce the planning board from 9 members to 7 members, which by itself would change the required quantum for a special permit vote from 6 positive votes to 5. The second thing is important, along with that, we'll be proposing to change the term of membership of planning board members from 5 years to 3 years, so that it's perhaps less of a burden facing people and easier to recruit members. And then the final thing is to authorize the appointment of 2 associate members of the planning board who could fill in if certain planning board members were absent in order to vote on a special permit. I think these 3 things are really, again, they're all intended to help have a full planning board and to have enough members to always be able to vote on be able to have at least the possibility of an affirmative vote, 2/3 vote on a special permit application. Now, right now, under state law, these are all things that are the associate members are specifically authorized under state law for special permits. And the zoning board already has this in place. There's actually a bill in the legislature right now that would expand the use of associate members to all types of other planning board actions, such as site plan approval, for example, subdivision. We're not there yet, but I just want to let everybody know that it's something that could be coming up in the future. So I guess I'll open that up for any questions about what we're proposing to do here and what the effect might be, and if there are any concerns that anybody might have from the board or from the city. From the council. Oh, Council President.
Yeah, thank you. I just, I want to be certain that I'm understanding what you're requesting here. So the idea is to move the membership of the planning board from 9 members to 7 members, but allow for 2 associate members that could potentially fill in when you aren't able to reach a quorum due to either absences or people that need to recuse. Is that in simpler language what you're suggesting?
Absolutely. Thank you. Did you get that?
I'm
Yes,
sorry.
you're right.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your,
You are correct.
okay, fantastic, thank you.
Counselor
Sorry, I
Conlon.
yield.
Oh, Councillor Khan.
Yes, thank you. I guess my question on that is that done in other communities? I guess I never heard of the associate role, and if you said something, my apologies. I think the audio cut in and out when you did your opening. And the second point on this one is in terms of the modification to reducing, it is something I always heard that was a desire to see this change happen. And so while I welcome that, I do wonder, by creating the associate need, how has traditionally, and I'm guessing this is why the desire is for this, is that it's been hard to make a quorum. And so I guess maybe some background and context on other communities and how that's handled.
Sure. Well, in Newburyport, we actually have this in the zoning board right now. And the purpose is not so much to achieve a quorum as it is to make sure that we have at least the required 2/3 member of the full body in cases of a special permit application. So right now, with the 9-member board, we need 6 members to vote positively in order to approve a special permit. If we went to a 7-member board, we would need 5 members to approve the special permit. Plus, we would have 2 associate members who could fill in if if we didn't have enough members to do that. And the idea here is to not have a situation where a member comes to a meeting and then, where an applicant comes to a meeting and finds that there is a risk just because of who's in the room, that they would not be able to get a positive vote. So it's done in many other communities. It's specifically authorized by the state statute, and we already do it here in Newburyport for the zoning board.
Chair, if I could add to that comment.
Yes, I do.
So the question was asked if it's in elsewhere, and I have pointed out in the past the example that the Boston Landmarks Commission has associate membership for that very reason, and it works very well. They also have an expectation that associate members attend the meetings, and they'll find out that evening whether or not they are voting or not voting, but they stay relevant to the content and provide the critical mass that's requested.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so it really is more about conflicts, if I'm repeating this correctly, if there tends to be some conflicts and they cannot participate in the vote.
Either it could be conflicts or it could be vacancies in the board, because even if you have had 2 members missing from a 9-member board, you still need to have 6 members vote positively for a special permit. So it's not 2/3 of the actual members that we have, but 2/3 of the total members that are authorized by the ordinance, the city ordinance. So even if we had 7 members on our, right now we have 8 members on our board, even though it's a 9-member board. So if two of those members were absent and one had a conflict, for example, we wouldn't be able to approve any special permits. So it's just a matter of being able to fill in the seats when there's a vacancy or a conflict, or a member is prevented from voting because they have missed previous meetings.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alden?
It's just one question about the mechanics of that working in a situation where there were the seven members of the board and then 2 alternates, associate members there. If there was one person that had a conflict, recusal or whatever, would you only bring in one of the associates? That's not any time a special permit is being called for, that both associates would come in, for example.
Right. The way the ordinance is written is that the chair would find the actual words here, but the chair can designate a member to fill in by defining the extra wording.
I put this the very last.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, it's a different type, that's why I'm not seeing it. Yes, so it says the chair of the planning board may designate an associate member to sit on the board for the purposes of acting on a special permit application in the case of absence, inability to act, or conflict of interest on the part of any member of the planning board before the event of a vacancy board. So it would be, the chair would designate a member to fill in. Yes.
Yeah, I'm generally supportive of this, certainly shortening the term to 3 years, 5 years is a long time as we go. And, you know, let me also take this as an opportunity to thank the members of the planning board. You are a very hard working board, long meetings, and, you know, I think your expertise may not always seem appreciated by members of the public, but it is very important to the successful functioning of our little city. You know, my personal experience with this, I served on the ZBA for 2 years. I think it was a year into it when it dawned on me that some of us were associate members and some of us were regular members. Nobody really explained that to me, but that did work quite well. And that board is smaller. But you know, we would have a number of absences, and then people would need to catch up on and you know, certify that they have either they have watched the recording or listened to the recording. I think we were taping things at that point, not video, in order to participate in the next meeting on a particular matter that had been discussed at a prior meeting. So I think that did that was good for that board. And yeah, there's nothing worse than something big coming up and you don't have enough people. So I think this simple adjustment of the associate members, you know, is a way to have a you know, that the super majority requirement a little bit lower, but you still have the same number of bodies that can kind of plug in and make that happen, make a decision one way or the other. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And it would be, you know, before whatever happens, before the full council would vote on this, I would definitely like to do a little research and figure out if somebody, one of the area planning commissions knows how many municipalities are actually doing this sort of thing. That would be useful to me to feel a little bit more comfortable with it, but I approve the concept.
Thank you. Councilor Wright?
I'm just curious what the current term of the ZBA appointments are.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I think there's 3 years.
I think they're great.
3 years.
So it makes sense to synchronize those 2 boards.
Councilor Preston, do you have your hand up?
Or yes, I do. I would just like to echo Cameron's comments, and just thank the planning board as a whole. It really does seem like one of the most thankless committee appointments that one can take on, and I realize it's an enormous amount of work for you guys, with a lot of conflict at the same time. The associate position, you know, it seems to me that it would just be something very hard to recruit for. You know, you're essentially looking for the same level of commitment from someone, and they only get to vote, you know, irregularly. But if it's working in other places, I certainly have no evidence to suggest that it wouldn't work here as well. And then thirdly, to follow on to Councilor Wright's comments about, you know, at least following along with ZBA in terms of how long the term is. The only thing I would suggest is to be certain that those terms don't all coincide. I think the worst thing we could ever find is if the entire planning board went away, if all of your terms were 3 years and you were all in the same 3 years and all of you went away at the same time, I think that would be a world of hurt for Newburyport. So I think again, as a board that is, ultimately pretty thankless, having shorter terms is probably helpful from a recruitment standpoint, but just making sure that you have staggering in terms of where your terms are. So otherwise I yield. Thank you.
It's a question, and maybe I missed it either in what's been said or what I'm reading, but I think the way the ZBA works it is, there are whatever the number, I can't remember what the number of members are, plus 2, 7. What's that? 5 plus 2. It's 5 plus 2. Okay, so the supermajority in that case is 4. I mean, 4 votes. So the 2 associate members, when there's a vacancy and membership, full membership, one of the associates, whoever's more senior, moves into that slot. And then, so the next person brought on to the board is an associate member. The new person who comes on as an associate member. If there's another vacancy in the regular membership, the associate member moves up. So to Councilor Preston's point, you're not a permanent associate member. It's kind of almost like a formally kind of minor league, which I think it helps with onboarding because unless you're steeped in land use for either ZBA or planning board, there's a learning curve. Yeah.
If I could, to the chair, or may want to speak to this.
I was just going to answer that. Just say that you're correct that it does serve as a quarantine, but in fact, you would have to have a new appointment by the city council. It's not an automatic move up. The associate is appointed and approved by the city council as an associate. And then if that associate wishes to move up to be a full member, it will be a new appointment by the mayor and a new approval by the city council.
The other thing I was going to add is just that I think the chair, has tried to rotate those 2 associates, through, and recognizing that this is essentially an opportunity for some folks who might be too before they get some experience or elevating themselves to the full level where they're constantly voting on things as opposed to, directly on an active basis.
Okay.
Right.
But I think the point that you made, Councilor Cameron, is very good, which is that essentially because you may not know whether somebody is an associate or full member, it's really a 9-member board that really has a requirement of 5 votes instead of 6 votes for approving special permit. Any other comments or questions from planning board members or councilors? If not, I would open up the public hearing if anybody wishes to be heard on these 2 proposed ordinance amendments. If not, I will close the public hearing. Okay. So do I have a motion from the members of the planning board about the hearing and the recommendation?
One question, are we going to recommend ordinance 137, because that's under zoning, whereas 136 is general ordinance, and that doesn't necessarily come under, so I think our recommendation would be 137.
Yeah, there's only a statutory requirement for the planning board to weigh in the zoning piece of it here, but obviously there's a relationship to it seems to make sense with the board. I presume recommend adoption of both because we actually have to codify both the general ordinance and the zoning system. So
We don't have to recommend 136 for something.
right.
So I guess my preference would be to have a single motion of both proposed ordinances.
Okay.
So is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. I'll just do a roll call on that. For closing the public hearing, Alden,
Yes.
Beth,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes,
and Rick, yes. Okay, now a motion, I would like to have a motion if it's agreeable to recommend approval of both ordinances 136 and 137.
Sorry, just Chair, one point, did you want to address one string there? There was one string there in there where we unfortunately retained chairman as opposed to chair. And I think we just wanted to recommend that the council include that as a form that they correct it to just chair.
Yes, in ordinance 136, section 2-118, we wanted to change elected chairman to elected chair, just to be consistent with everything else. So that would be a minor amendment to this motion.
So I hopefully a friendly amendment.
Yes. So do I have a motion from planning board? Yes, is there a second? Thank you. So a quick roll call on that. This is on both ordinances. Alden?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Don?
Yes.
Richard?
Yes,
And Rick, yes. Thank you. So, George,
Okay, would we want to do a motion to report out favorably the so we have two ordinances, one zoning.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to recommend approval of ordinance 136 and 137 to the full council.
Second.
With the seconded with the scriveners are.
Yes.
Seconded by.
Second,
Okay, great. Any further discussion?
none,
We'll do a roll call on Council Preston,
yes,
Council Wright,
Yes.
Council Cameron, yes, so that would be 3-0 in favor. And I'll make a motion to close our portion of the joint public hearing.
Second.
Okay.
So moved.
So
moved.
From Council Wright, seconded by Council Preston. Okay, so we'll close our portion of the public hearing, roll call, Council Preston,
yes.
so right, yes. Cameron, yes, so 3-0, we close the public hearing, and thank you all, and have a delightful evening.
thank you, councilors.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is a public hearing for an application to completeness road and site plan review for Hale Business Park LLC for the property of 21 Malcolm White Road.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think there's actually two parts to this application this evening, right? We have the completeness review. You might recall you're doing that at this meeting, and then the actual application itself. So for the record, Lisa Mead, B. Tellerman Costa, 30 Green Street, on behalf of Hale Business Park LLC. With me this evening are Craig Pacina and Patrick Reddy, who are the principals. Steve Sawyer is online. He is the engineer on the project. Tom Hughes is the wetland scientist who's on the project, and my colleague Brian Clemens is also here with us this evening. So for the completeness review, Andy, if you could go to the first slide. We have provided to the board a set of plans, which includes all of the 10 requirements in the ordinance for site plan review applications for major site plan review. We've also included the stormwater report. We've included the lighting fixtures as required. We have also included a waiver letter that requests a waiver from a full traffic report. We have provided a traffic memo. However, we requested a waiver from a full environmental and community impact report. We have been actually working with the Conservation Commission for about a year on this project. So obviously that's a part of this discussion, but we had requested a waiver from the full report. We have included environmental information in our filings. And we've requested a waiver from the requirement that a landscape architect sign the plans, given the fact that all of the plantings are in and around wetlands. Those are all being designed and by the wetlands scientists in conjunction with our work with the Conservation Commission, but we do have that plan tonight. It just won't be signed by a landscape architect. And as a result, I would ask the board find that the application is complete before we proceed.
So we, in order to find the application, we need to.
First, grant the waivers, yes, the office has no objection to that. Yes.
So I have no objection to that, but I have a couple of questions that I guess the first thing is the city's tree ordinance. I would like to recommend that we grant a waiver from the tree ordinance, recognizing that there's landscape plantings on the site, but we're not actually going to be providing street trees. Does that make sense?
It does, except that I believe the tree ordinance only applies to special permits and variances, and this is a site plan review.
There is a capture of this in the site plan review
Okay.
section.
So I think it would be appropriate to grant that waiver as well.
Just so we don't have to worry.
Sure, that's fine.
And then when we get to the actual approval of the application, this doesn't affect the waiver vote, but I am going to request a separate landscaping plan, not signed by a landscape architect. It's just a plan right now. There's so much going on in the plan. I would like to have a separate landscaping plan where those plantings are pulled out and clearly stated. That's not for right now. It's just going ahead. So then we would be looking, the first request would be for a motion to grant the waivers from the complete environmental report, complete traffic study, the signing of the landscape plan by a landscape architect, and the street tree. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Could I have, is there any discussion about that before we move on to that? Okay, could I have a motion to grant those waivers? Second?
I'll second.
Second, thank you. Okay, I will do a roll call vote on that. Alden?
Yes.
Beth?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Don? Yes. Richard?
Yes.
Somebody? Rick? Did I ask for you? I'm writing it down. Okay, so that passes. And I'm sorry, I did that pretty quickly. Remind me if I don't ask for discussion. Although that seems pretty clear. So then the next motion would be to find that the application is complete with those waivers. Is that correct, Andy?
Correct.
Could I have a motion for that effect? Don, thank you. Second? Bob? Okay, any discussion? Okay, roll call, Alden.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Richard. And Richard.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself fast enough. Yes.
And Rick, yes. Thanks. Okay. Moving right along.
Thank you. Andy, I think you can go to the next slide, and then the next one, please. So this is an application, members of the board, for an industrial services building located at the corner of Malcolm Point Drive and Hale Street. As I said a little bit ago, the applicant has actually been working with the Conservation Commission for about a year on this, not every meeting, but on and off for about a year, because a portion of this property, as we're going to describe in a little bit, a little over 5 acres, is actually going to be deeded over to the Conservation Commission. And as you will see shortly, a significant portion of the property is in wetlands, and so we've had to work closely with them. We've also been in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals. Because of the wetlands on the property, we've had to move the building up into the front yard setback. And the Zoning Board of Appeals gave us a variance to do that. And so we have received approval from the Zoning Board of Appeals. The proposal is to build a building that has a footprint of 2,880 square feet on this property. We are putting it on a portion of the lot, which I'll show you in a minute, which is just over an acre at 54,520 square feet, where the ordinance requires 50,000 square feet for a lot in the industrial park with 200 feet of frontage. The remainder of the parcel, which I'm going to show you, which is lot A4 in a moment, includes almost 5.5 acres of land, which will be donated to the Conservation Commission. The commission has opened its notice of intent hearing. We've been before them a couple of times. They've continued it until we have this hearing to make sure that you're okay with the layout before they finalize their order of conditions. So as I said, the building includes a footprint of 2,880 square feet. It requires 6 parking spaces. Rick, close your ears a little bit. We're providing 15 parking spaces and 2 handicapped parking spaces. So that will be 17 spaces, which actually is appropriate for this building because there's no other room on the lot.
So the slide where it says the 15 is required is correct.
No, there's 6 does it say 15 is required? I apologize. No, there's that slide's incorrect. There's 6 parking spaces required for this, but there are 15 spaces provided with 2 handicap spaces. The fire department, as you're going to see in a minute, and Steve will review, has required 2 means of egress on the lot. So we have to go around the lot no matter what. And so we're adding parking parallel in the back, and you'll see that in the layout. It's not like there's extraneous parking being provided. The other thing which I'm going to show you in a minute also is this building kind of acts as a transition between the residential properties across the street and then the industrial uses both behind it on Malcolm Hoyt Drive as well as further down south on Hale Street. And so the building is actually quite modest for the industrial park and is only 25 feet tall. It gives the appearance of a residential structure from the front. You'll see that from the doorways that we have momentarily that Eileen Graff designed. So if you go to the next slide, please. So as an overview, and then I'm going to turn it over to Steve, but as an overview, this is the entire parcel. So at the top is Hale Street. At the left is a industrial services building, but that's on a different lot. And so the lot that we're looking at in the area to be developed is actually the front where you see all of those squigglies, right? Those are all various wetlands markers. And everything to the rear is going to be donated to the Conservation Commission. And so with that, Steve, we have the this overall site plan, then the A&R, and then the regular site plan. So I'm going to turn it over to you to review all 3 of those plans.
Okay, good evening, Steve Sawyer with GM2. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're actually constructing a new 3-unit industrial building. It's going to be in the upland just to the east of the existing industrial building. And with that, I had actually permitted that other building back a few years back. This is similar, basically the similar use of that structure, just much smaller. It's about a third of the size, so it's very small. Actually, there's a lot of residential buildings that are bigger than this, but due to the commercial application, we're brought in for full stormwater and such. And as you can see, you can see the subdivision of the parcel. Andy, I don't know if you can trace that line. Yep. So. Okay, there we go. So that's a piece of land that's going to be conveyed to the Conservation Commission. It's probably, I don't know, it's probably 75% wetland, 25% upland. There actually is a large upland area associated with it, with that parcel. So I think we can just jump on to the next slide. All right, so the site plan, it's a very small lot or very small development. I think the disturbed area is under a ½ acre. Very simple. So originally we had provided just one entry and exit on the left or the west side of the parcel wrapped around. And then, so we had parking on the west side and then parking in the rear. And along the back of the building, there's 3 garage doors located there. So they'd be similar to the other project next door. That would be, as far as any construction vehicles or such that needed access, they'd be parked in access behind the building, so it's shielded from any residential view from the front. And then we provided the 2 handicap spaces as you come in on the left, with the normal, or any access from visitors, and employees could also come in from the front, where there'll be 3 doors with a concrete sidewalk running across the front of that building. As part of the zoning review, the fire department wanted full access around the building. So we did is we ended up kicking the building a little bit to the west, and then they only needed a one-way. They said just one way would be fine. So that the eastern access is exit only. It's a 16-foot wide, which they felt was more than adequate for their truck to negotiate through. 16-foot wide exit only. So that was done as part of the fire department review. There's water and sewer, so there'll be a fire and water service to the building, also a 6-inch sewer service, all of service out to Hale Street. And then as far as the stormwater, it's a fairly small structure, and as you can see, we actually have quite a bit of stormwater management for the size of the structure in the pavement. So what we're proposing is to have almost 80% or 85% of the site to flow to the rear. It's all low impact design, sheet flow. It's going to flow back to that area that's it's a 4-bay area where it'll provide the pre-treatment. From that location in the rear to the east, there's a larger constructed stormwater wetland. That's where the water will be detained, treated before it's discharged. This is a similar, because of the high groundwater, impermeable soils and such, the constructed stormwater wetland made the most sense for as far as stormwater treatment. And then in the front, actually in the exit, I did have to install a small, on the exit, because of the grade back to the street, I do install a small catch basin, which collects some stormwater and directs it to the rear. And then in the entry area, the entry and exit, the main one, I provided a small rain garden area to treat that. There is a small, of course, the aprons that are on city property, we can't collect and treat that because that's typical of any project where the aprons in the city way. But all of that water actually flows along. There's a swale, that runs along Hale Street that would provide treatment to the stormwater prior to discharging. So that's the only item, only area that wouldn't be fully treated. I did receive some comments from Phil Christensen. I'm gonna, one of his comments was that I need to split, it's such a small area. Everything flows around to the east, that low wetland area to the east and to the rear of the property. So I just considered it one drainage area. He's asking me to cut this site into 3 separate drainage areas. One of the drainage areas is only 1,000 square feet, which seems a little bit too ticky-tacky for me, but I will do it. It really doesn't, it won't change much of the stormwater, the stormwater that I'm providing for this project, but I will be updating the calculations to meet his comments on that. So I think that covers it on the site. As Lisa mentioned, we have 15 spaces along with 2 handicap, which is ample for this project. Probably more than we need, but we really don't want cars there's really no opportunity for cars to park on Hale Street. So we have to make sure we can cover the parking for this facility on site. And I think that covers it. I think we did provide planting around the building. I think there's some eastern, Tom might be able to chime in. Yep.
Tom's here, he'll go over that.
Okay. All right, so I think that covers it in the civil, and they can answer any questions. Tom can talk about the trees. Thank you.
So as Steve said, we have to continue to respond to Phil Christensen's peer review, so we're going to be back anyway. So that'll be fine to provide a landscaping plan as well. And just to follow up on that, so in the industrial park on these lots, you're allowed to have 30% lot coverage This lot has 5.3% lot coverage, right? So, there's really a minor use of the entire parcel for obvious reasons. And I'm talking only about this lot, not the whole parcel. So you're permitting a site plan review on this new parcel. I think it's A4 on the site plan. It's your back lot is being transferred. So the front lot is what the site plan review, which will become 21 Hale Street. So with that, if you go to the next slide, please. So I just want to show the elevations before Tom goes over the landscape plan. Here's the elevations in the front. You can see, as I said before, it looks more as in residential form. It's only 25 feet to the mean roof, which is, below even our residential height requirements. It's got doorways that are residential size in the front, and obviously the windows are of a residential nature. And then you can see the end elevation there. Go to the next slide. Here's the rear elevation. So here's where the garage doors are, where people are going to be able to get in and out of the building for the appropriate use. So I think if you go down to the fast, go down to the fast slide right there. Is that go back up to there you go. And then maybe Tom will talk about the and we'll provide more detail as you indicated.
Thank you, Lisa. Good evening, Tom Hughes with Hughes Environmental Consulting. I acknowledge when this thing's up on the screen, it's kind of tough to see the planting, so we certainly will get you something that's clearer to read. Essentially, what I did, most of the site, except one small area in the top left, is in the buffer zone to wetlands. So site-wide, I honored the typical call to have everything be a native species that the Conservation Commission is looking for. But I also tried to have the area along Hale Street look as if somebody might be landscaping in front of a residential building to kind of achieve that same look. So along the Hale Street area, there are 6 red cedar that will be going in. And then off in the upper left on that plan, there's a tulip tree. Tulip tree is for you guys who may not be familiar with it. It's not used a lot, but it's a fantastic tree. It gets a lot of size. It's great for storing carbon long term. And it's just a real pretty tree once it gets established. Along the left-hand side on the edge of the parking, it's all Cornus Florida, which is a dogwood. And it's a flowering dogwood. And then I mix flowering dogwood into the other plantings that are in the areas that are closer to the wetland, kind of at the bottom and then off to the right. There's a couple of those flowering dogwood in there, but I also have high bush blueberry, red maple. There's cranberry bush, which is a type of viburnum, and winterberry. And winterberry, as you may be aware, it's the one that has the red berries all over it that lasts through at least the first part of the winter to the deer get them all. But it gives you a nice, pretty look. The high bush blueberry have a really nice red leaf in the fall. So it's not only kind of a wetland plant, but it also looks decent around this. And then behind all of that is kind of the mess of nature that's already on site. So we're kind of merging from the development site back into the buffer zone that's in more of a natural state. So overall, I think what we have is from Hale Street, really decent looking landscaping, and then from the parking lot, really decent looking landscaping. And then as you get closer to the wetlands, it's good looking, but it also merges in. So people like me think it's good looking, but also normal people think it's good. Probably the best way to put it. So with that said, I think that I can work with Steve to basically turn off a whole bunch of layers and we can brighten up those plants, and I'll put some planting tables with quantities. And I noticed that the dogwoods are sized at 1.5 dBH, but typically when you purchase those, they're either in a gallon size or in a height size, so we'll change the sizing on that. But we're looking to put in some pretty decent size dogwoods along the perimeter, and I think it'll be a great looking amenity. And again,
can't emphasize enough, this thing's like house size. This is not like a big industrial park development, and I doubt you get a lot of plans in here at 20 scale. So it may look big, but this is the kind of scale I typically look at conservation commission in single family home. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anything else, Genevieve?
Well, I was gonna go through the criteria and performance standards, but we can just take questions. I've submitted all of that information, so that's up to you.
I would rather just take questions. Move on.
Go right ahead.
Questions from board members? Bob?
Chair, I had a question.
Bob is going first. Yeah,
Sorry.
Just one quick question about the parking as it's laid out. If what I'm seeing is parking on the backside of the building.
Right, there's some parallel parking spaces along the backside.
Parallel.
That's right.
I'm just wondering if you're over the parking requirement, whether it's really necessary to do that and whether that would give you more room for wetlands. But you're over the parking requirement.
There's we have 1, 2, 3, 5 parking spaces. That take it out.
Yeah, I don't think it. Lisa, should I chime in on that one?
Yes, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I really, I think we need to be very careful about it. I would, as we get, removing parking might be problematic, I guess, in the event that I really don't want, I want to make sure we have it covered. And we do need, yeah, that area in the rear would probably be used for construction. I mean, we're not sure of the tenants, but most likely it's like a electrical contractor or somebody like that, where they may park one of their vehicles back there, or to get access in and out of the garage. I do want to keep as much pavement in that rear area as possible, possible and practical. And I think removing, it's a 7-foot wide by 20, let's see, there's 4 22-foot spaces. We also have the trash containers located back in that area. So I feel uncomfortable about trying to skinny up that back area.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Richard?
I was just curious what the rationale was for the variance to bring the building closer to Hale Street. I think it was in the neighborhood of 20-some feet versus the normal 60-foot setback. And the adjacent building just to the west is obviously set further back. So I was wondering what the rationale was.
The rationale is because of the wetlands and because the wetlands located on either side and in the back. So it was a soil condition. And frankly, the zoning board kind of liked it because it took on more of a residential feel because the residents next across the street are about the same distance.
Understood. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yes, I'm a member of the Energy Advisory Committee, and the committee, and it's also noted, you did a nice job of noting about being energy efficient. And I would just say if the applicant would like any advice, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act that perhaps provides additional incentives rebates, I think they want to reach out to the Energy Advisory Committee. I'd be happy to give them a contact or two. They'd be very happy for no charge to provide any input.
Thank you. Richard, do you still have another question? Your hands up.
No, my apologies. I just lowered it.
Thank you. I had a couple of things. First of all, I do like having the building closer to the street and what that does for the appearance of it. I had a concern about the driveways because, as you know, we're looking at making improvements to Hale Street, very likely widening Hale Street within the existing right of way. We don't know what the plans are at this point, but I'm wondering whether the driveway apron will work. If you, and also, I have a similar question about the snow storage areas, whether widening the pavement of Hale Street within the right of way would impact the site plan at all. And I guess a question, I'm not sure whether this has come up in staff discussions, but whether using the city right of way for snow storage for development is something we've done in the past.
I can't say, a practical situation out in the field, what's happening there. Generally speaking, we obviously snow storage for the public right by the city and private property accordingly. I don't know, every instance that those things were involved to the TV. Here, I think, and I did talk to the city engineer, there was an expectation, at least as far as the sort of bike lane, sidewalk and connections we're talking about on Hill Street. He was expecting some of that work to happen on the opposite side of the street. But I think generally speaking, it's preferable to make sure that any site storage is development on the private property as opposed to going to the right of way. Irrespective of what the city ends up doing on Hill Street, it's not hold on to any of that sort of obstructing.
I guess my question was that I understood that we'd probably be doing the actual bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure on the north side, but we might need to widen the travel lane, the south side, so there might not be as much space in the public right of way as you're using for the driveway and snow storage.
Right.
in this plan.
So I missed the fact that Mr. Sawyer put the snow storage in the right of way, so we'll relocate the snow storage off of the right of way, obviously. But if any of the aprons along Hale Street that currently exist in the right of way, they're gonna have to move back up. So if the city were to do that, there would have to be a new order of conditions for the city along there, and then the driveways would have to be adjusted accordingly. Steve, as to the driveway backing into the apron backing into the property, I mean, that would be a significant expansion, right? There's a big right of way there before the travel path.
So I guess I'm not suggesting that the entire right of way would be taken over.
Right.
But I'm just suggesting that, and I prefaced it by saying I like the fact that the building is close to the street, but that makes it tighter to get
Right.
from the street into the parking spaces. So I was just wondering whether, if you had a few feet, whether that's going to impact or that's going to work.
Well, I'm gonna let Steve answer that from an engineering point of view, but obviously it's right of way then. Go ahead.
Yeah, so right now we have from the edge of pavement to our right of way line, I think there's about 20 feet. 20 feet. So, I don't, there's highly unlikely they're gonna widen that road by more than 5 feet or so. Maybe even 10 feet, but that still gives you 10 feet from the right of way to the edge of pavement, which we could easily pull our radiuses back and reconfigure the apron to meet the needs of that, of the city realignment, of any potential realignment or widening of Hale. I have had a couple, myself, I've had a couple discussions with John Eric White on this item, and he said at this stage for us to try and change things to meet what we really don't know what's going to happen there yet doesn't make sense at all. And I think he agrees with the fact that we have such a expansive area between the edge of pavement currently and the right of way line that we have more than ample room to reconfigure our pull our radiuses back and such in our entry back, and still everything would function the same on our property.
I guess with respect to the snow storage, I don't know where there are places. I think you probably designed it to have the snow storage area as far away from the wetlands as possible.
Well, if you look, those are just two of the snow storage areas around the entire parcel. There's plenty of snow storage here. And then if there's some sort of significant event, like everywhere else, sometimes they'll have to hire somebody to haul it off if they can't find places to push it. But I'm showing, there's no reason you can't store snow in the 4-bay area. You can just pile snow in there, because the intent of the 4-bay area is to collect initial sediments and such. It's not where the final polishing and treatment is. So that whole area in the rear, the only place we can't push it, you can't push it directly into our constructed stormwater wetland on the east side of the property. You can't push snow into that directly, but you can store the snow in front of the, anywhere in front of the building. You have some room to the either side of the driveway. One thing we are going to have to be careful of, I think I had my snow storage overlapping with Tom's, I think there were the dogwood trees, I think, which there is space between them, but if you're hammering snow onto them, we got to be careful about that. So I will update the plan to show snow storage areas outside of the public right of way and coordinate it with the landscaping. And typically when they do plow in, if they're coming in to plow, they just plow to the side when they come in and out of the, when you come in and out of the site, in and out of the entry. So there will be.
That's snow storage, that's like a windrow or something.
So I guess another reason why it would be helpful to have that separate landscaping plan so we can see the snow, how the snow storage against the land.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't disagree with that at all.
Are there any other questions from the board members?
So, Mr. Chair, from a process point of view, I won't go through all the form standards. We've submitted that, so they are on the record. But we will file before the next meeting the A&R plan, right? So we haven't filed officially the A&R plan because you only have 21 days to act on it. So we didn't want to push you into that. So we'll file the A&R plan at the next meeting so that, assuming that we've addressed all of these issues, you can approve the A&R plan at the same time you finish up the site plan.
So I had a question about that. Actually.
Sure.
Is there a reason why we can't approve this before the A&R plan is filed?
No, you could, but we would like it done all at the same time because the Conservation Commission would like to see it too. And because they want to issue an order of conditions and know what parcel they're getting.
Because, well, and let me, the other question I had was, in the case of the Conservation Commission, can they accept it without city council approval?
Depends on who you talk to.
Because I want to avoid that situation where we're going to city council, the city council says, you're making us.
No, so chapter 44, section 8C authorizes the Conservation Commission with the approval of the executive body to accept gifts of land. The city has a different process, but that's what the statute says. So, for example, if you're in a town, you don't need to go to town meeting to accept a gift of land for the Conservation Commission. You just need the Board of Selectmen, the executive authority, and the Conservation Commission to allow it. So they could do it no matter what, but we want the A&R plan done anyway, because the site plan is only applicable to this portion of the site. And so regardless, you don't have to have your decision contingent on the A&R plan, which can have the A&R plan approved because our site plan filing was for the lot up front. So.
Related to that, I noticed on the full plan of the site that it appears that, I may be misinterpreting the plan, it appears that there's drainage from that site is flowing into the site that the Conservation Commission will be accepting. Is that true?
I'm gonna have Steve answer the drainage questions. So I don't know that, I don't think that it is, but I don't know that answer. So Steve, Rick's question was, is there drainage flowing from the developed site, which is our site plan review site, into the lot that we're going to be donating to the Conservation Commission?
Yeah, so, yes. But what we're required, it's typical of any development. There's numerous developments where your stormwater crosses your property line. But that's the whole deal. That's why we do our stormwater calculations, is that we don't increase stormwater from our parcel off our lot lines. And so what my stormwater report is for our parcel, our new parcel, not the entire site. And we're not increasing flow off our site.
I guess my question was, and you may already be having these discussions with Conservation Commission. you're going to be asking the Conservation Commission to accept a parcel that is accepting industrial, stormwater from an industrial site. So I guess, has that come up in the?
Yeah, they know that they've seen these plans, right? They've been out there, they've done a site walk, they've seen the plans, they know how the wetlands are all working. And yes, the answer is yes.
So you would prefer to do the A&R at the same time as the site plan? And then I guess my question for Andy is, there are some, because the proposed special conditions in your staff report that says that prior to the issuance of the building permit for the proposed project, the applicant shall submit to the city council a plan and deed conveyance for approval and acceptance of the open space parcel. And prior to the occupancy permit, provide the zoning administrative proof of the recording of fee interest transfer of deed to the city. So if we're actually going to be acting on the A&R plan at the same time we're doing the site plan, do we need that first?
Yeah, no, so to your point, actually, we're happy to modify our work with this, given the scope
I
of
just
the project.
want to make it as simple as possible.
Yeah, no, I would agree with the point, it's just that we can tweak that, because it doesn't necessarily cover the same. We have a condition that the entire parcel would be contained as one going forward.
Thank you. Before I open the public hearing, last chance. It's gone.
What, isn't site plan review?
Yes, this is site plan review, major site plan review.
My bad. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, I will open the public hearing. Does anybody wish to comment or question on this application? Don't see anybody jumping up. So we'll close the public hearing. And I guess what we're looking for at this point is a motion to continue to the next meeting. Is that the case?
I think that's fine. You can do a landscape plan and write a week. So the next meeting is the 14th. So we can pull the landscape plan off and get that 15, right, right, 14. So by next Wednesday, yeah, we can do that. And if not, we'll ask for continuance, but I would like to go to the 15th, yes.
And you'll be ready with the A&R plan and the concert, everything. The
Right, the A&R plan is ready. It just needs to be put on a Mylar and an application file.
And just, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think about this. So this does need to go, you'll be submitting the A&R plan, we'll be approving the site plan, but you still need, according to Newburyport's processes, to go to the city council.
So what we would like to do is, as to the site plan review, if you want to have a condition, your condition can say that we have submitted a deed, right, to the city council and the conservation commission, not that they have accepted it, right? So I'm fine with that because the conservation commission is going to have a condition in their order of conditions that we donate the land in the back also. So, frankly, I don't think you need it at all, but you can.
We've had this problem recently.
Yes, we have. So that's why I'm suggesting we submit, not that it gets recorded. Because if our job is to submit, if somebody doesn't want to accept it, we can't say it.
It's true for the chairs, the point that you raised, I think you're thinking of Hancock Street, that is street easement, and the concern that was raised by maybe at least one councilor was the question of whether or not the planning board are approving or requiring easement there was putting essentially an obligation on our city Department of Public Services to maintain trees in one way or another, or making a connection there with the department's operations, something that the executive branch, would be typically overseeing. So at any rate, the sum result here is I reached out to the city engineer, who is currently acting as the acting director for the time being for public services, and asked him for his feedback on this particular issue here, where there's a little bit of stormwater that eventually is leaving the site here, but as Steve pointed out, they're essentially dealing with no peak increases at any point on the property line, right? It's not any peak discharges or any increases off the lot lines. Here, it's the natural flow basically happening downstream. And my question for him was, if the city council is accepting the land and they're transferring that carrying custody over the conservation commission, which is, as already mentioned, the typical process here, what we do, that we would, if we had that question arise. His opinion was that he actually felt that was perfectly fine, that he wasn't concerned about this sort of an undue burden being placed on the city or Department of Public Services. They do happen to maintain swales in the business park, and this may be something that they're taking a look at as part of the overall scheme, sort of going forward out there, but they didn't see this as being any, burden on their part, so to speak, where the larger parcel, towards the back, has, a continuation of what is a fair amount of wetlands and swales in the business park. You didn't see that as being an issue from that end.
Just trying to avoid.
No, I'm with you. I appreciate that.
So, I guess it's a simple, motion we're looking for is to continue this to the meeting on
March.
March 15th. Yes.
So moved. Second.
Okay, we'll have to have a roll call. Alden,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Don, yes, Richard,
Yes.
Rick, yes.
Thank you very
In a
much.
couple weeks.
And Andy, maybe if you could share that condition with me, that would be great.
Sure.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, now we're moving on to general business, and we have a request for release of covenant at Dexter Lane. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you for hearing me. My name is Colleen Hayes from Fenner and Nicholson. And the reason we're requesting this release of covenant is it was never released in the 60s when the subdivision was finished and the street was subsequently accepted by the city. So as part of a title search that we did on the conveyance of lot of 14 Dexter Lane, this came up. So in an effort to just kind of clean the slate and not have any problems for anyone going forward, we had put together a blanket release so that we can report it at the registry and no one else has to put up with any issues with the title.
So the question that I asked Andy last week was, so the lot configuration here is not actually how things have been. The last two lots don't exist. Yes.
Right.
And so the turnaround at the end, which is shown on the plan as a temporary reason for turning circles, is mostly on city park. And I guess the question is, do we have any concerns about that? I guess
I would not, I would essentially, say that the effect result of that is it's sort of extinguished, the city essentially has control of the property now,
so I was unclear actually as to what the covenant is.
You want to?
So this is not atypically, this has not come up, atypically, periodically, we find closing attorneys who are working for a client, and I don't know why it's missed in some cases and picked up in others. But a term closing attorney will pick up the fact that there's an encumbrance on the property, in this case, the fact that there was a covenant, in this case, I think it's the notation of the plan as opposed to a separate document that we nowadays would have to report to the registry referring to this plan, basically saying that those lots shouldn't be sold or transferred, until the roadway's been completed here, as I pointed out, this roadway's been completed decades ago and actually was further accepted by the city council as a public way. So, generally speaking, there shouldn't be, I would argue, much hesitation in releasing the covenant from the construction of this roadway so long ago, having been accepted by the city council, even if there were to be a debate. And this would be going back quite a while into some very basic plans back then. They're not quite as designed until there today. But to back and question the construction of that roadway where the city council actually already accepted it as a public way, we need to do this to hold that covenant release. So here, where all the lots were affected, and then they had come in requesting release for one of the lots, and we thought it made sense to have this lot release actually make it clear that it's covering all the lots, the residential lots on the street that have been developed, so that all the other lot owners don't have to go through the same effort if they reach a closing in the future, have to come in and have a covenant release for that one lot. Where here, it would seem really all the lots should be released from that covenant, really original construction from the extra plan.
We're just cleaning it up for everybody.
So I guess what does it's unclear to me. I hear what you said, and I see the note of the plan. Are we based is the effect of our release of covenant to eliminate the notes in the plan? Is that what we're doing?
It's basically saying that the notes in the plan are satisfied. The one that says that you can't go any further beyond, until you satisfy the plan with the construction of the roadway.
Right.
Here, for whatever reason, I don't, none of us were here at the time, for whatever reason, that wasn't closed completely, and so there was no actual action later on, where we typically would have a recorded covenant as a 8.5 by 11 document recorded in the registry. Here, there's a notation on the plan, and in this case, it's a similar release, basically saying, yes, at this point, we're determining that the roadway was reasonably, ultimately equal construction according to the planning board requirements. And that's further evidenced by the fact that city council followed suit and accepted the street as a public way. So the evidence would seem to suggest that the board is in a position to release the covenant for the construction of that roadway. Again, here recognizing that the city council actually goes so far as to accept it as a public way.
I think so. The wording of your proposed motion covers it.
I believe so, yes.
Is there everything? Okay. Any questions from the motion? Nope. So I guess we'll accept a motion to approve the request for release of covenant for all lots on Dexter Lane and authorize the planning board chair to sign the related release of covenant for all lots. Dexter.
Second.
One second. Okay, roll call, Alden.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Ron. Yes. Richard
Yes.
and Rick, yes.
I'm sorry, who made the second of that motion?
I did.
We have two requests for extensions. Should we take those up together, do you think?
I think it would make sense. I think we have Mr. Vinpelli here online.
Is there a way I can get the signatures tonight and then?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so. The one extra issue that we have is the chair has to be attested by the city clerk. At the bottom of that document, so it may make more sense actually for.
I'll go to City Hall tomorrow.
Okay, so we can take, yeah, okay.
Perfect, let's very well come together.
All right.
Thank you, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, I think that would make sense, and I'll them how I do this year represent on that one.
So you have the two requests for extension for 17 Nelson Point Road and 3 Stanley Tucker Drive.
Right.
Mr. Van Hook.
Mr. Vinpelli, did you want to address the board about the request?
Yes, hello.
Yes.
Hello,
Hello.
hi, this is Stephen McGouse. I'm an attorney at Myrick O'Connell. And I'm here, Attorney Roloffs could not make it this evening, so I'm here in his stead, if you would. And with me this evening are Jim Zampel and Chris Zampel. So if I may, Mr. Chairman. We're here for, of course, as you mentioned, item 4B, which concerns property at 17 Malcolm Hoyt Road. The property is located in the Industrial 1 zoning district. And we're here this evening seeking an extension of the approval of the site plan. The original decision was issued by this board on 7/14/20 and filed in the office of the city clerk on the 16th of July of 2020. And I hope you had an opportunity to review the letters submitted by Attorney Roloffs. As explained in the letter, the approval is valid through June 16th, 2023, and that's due to the tolling from the COVID crisis and the governor's declaration of emergency and the special legislation that tolled all permits. The project, as you may recall, because some of the members of the board were on the board when the original site plan was approved, is an addition of approximately 19,087 square feet to an existing building at this location at 17 Malcolm Hoyt Road. So, Mr. Chairman, we're requesting an extension of the site plan approval to June 16th, 2025. So that would be a 2-year extension. And we're available to answer any questions
if, beyond the letter, if you didn't have an opportunity to review the letter, we can go over that, the rationale for this.
Could you go ahead and continue to talk about 3 Stanley Tucker Drive as well?
I'm sorry?
Could you continue and talk about 3 Stanley Tucker Drive as well?
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, the approval was issued in July of 2020, and that, COVID began in March of 2020, and not to take everyone back to a dark place, but a lot of things shut down for a good long period of time. And the governor's the special legislation for the declaration of emergency that told all permits was a recognition of the economic hardships that weren't, of course, just limited to the Commonwealth, but were global. And since we've come out of COVID and the emergency order was terminated in, I believe, June of 21, there's been a supply chain and material price spikes for construction materials. So all of that has resulted in a delay and a tabling, if you will, of the project, but the owners are still intending to construct the project as approved.
Thank you. I guess the point of my question was we're discussing both applications together.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I didn't hear that. Okay. Well, thank you for that. So the second property is 3 Stanley Tucker Drive, which is pretty much next door. And this property is also, of course, located in the Industrial 1 zoning district. The project related to this site plan is a smaller addition, 9,688 square feet to the existing building. And again, we're seeking an extension of the approval of the site plan that was originally issued on July 14th of 2020 and filed with the Office of the City Clerk on the 16th of July of 2020. And as described in the letters from Attorney Roloffs, the original approval with the tolling by the emergency legislation during COVID was extended by that legislative act through June 16th of this year. But we are requesting respectfully an extension to June 16th of 2025 for the same rationale as previously described for the other project at Malcolm Hoyt Road.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, I just want to add, we also submitted requests for extensions of time with the Conservation Commission today for the orders of condition. So, thank you. We'll answer any questions the board may have.
Any questions from board members?
Aside from the tolling, which goes without saying, to me, the decision in front of us is to provide a 2-year extension. My only question on that is, with this 2-year extension, if this would have been reapplied now, are there any other standards that would be applied? As an example, to have our stormwater standards change to something, and as such, it would have to be changed. Otherwise, I don't have any issues.
It's a great question, Don. In this case, no. So the office would not have any objection to extension of time. In our opinion, it's really just allowing more time for the applicant project.
Thank you.
Nothing changed.
Hand up. I don't know if that's somebody representing.
He was just speaking. Are you all finished addressing the board? Mr. Connell?
Nothing has changed. The sites, everything's the same.
Yes, understood. Thank you.
Okay, there are no questions. Could I have a motion on both 17 Malcolm Hoyt Road and 3 Stanley Tucker Drive to extend the site plan review permit term for 2 years up to and including June 16th, 2025?
I'll move that.
Alden, thank you. Second, Rob, great. Okay, roll call, Alden,
Yes.
yeah.
I'm gonna abstain from voting on this just because of my work with Jeff
Great.
Roloffs.
Bob,
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes.
Rick votes yes. Okay. You have your extensions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Good night. Okay, the last item under, before other updates is approval of minutes of the February 1st, 2023 meeting. I submitted some comments to Caitlin. Are there any other comments or concerns or questions about this? Not, then, roll call on that. Alden,
Yes.
yeah.
I wasn't there, so I will abstain.
Bob,
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Don, stay. Richard,
Yes.
I vote yes. Okay. Other business, updates. We've done a couple of things you'd like to bring up.
Yes, I would, and I'll try to keep it brief. The first one was, as you know, I'm the planning board representative for the Community Preservation Committee, and next year, one of you 7 or 6, I'm assuming Rick's not going to do it, we'll be here. And it was interesting, it's one of the things I wanted to just bring up to you, and it actually was coincidentally covered today. And that is, the planning board should be careful if it ever gets to the situation where we're agreeing or perhaps even implying that we're going to convey land to the city. So why is that? Isn't that good? Well, as an example, Community Preservation Committee is now being requested, and one could argue that's the reason for these funds for good things. Spend $55,000 to provide a new fence and full form lane and some other things. When this first came up, came before, it's not that we were part of that decision. That was never discussed. So if it ever comes up with someone buying land or somehow we get involved, I would just caution all of you to say there's always perhaps an ongoing cost. So just have it enter on that. The second thing I wanted to mention to you, and I actually spoke to Andy a bit about this on the Energy Advisory Committee. There's been a reasonable amount of discussion on 5G. And we discussed it, we said it's most appropriate for the planning board and or the planning director to address this issue. And the issue is that there's some feel that we're gonna have one of these days, we're gonna have all these antennas every 200 to 300 feet. If in fact that's the case, there's some communities that have addressed it, there's other ways to do it, and we'll talk about, well, destroy this store, you can actually put it on houses that they can't get it from the city, et cetera, et cetera. So, make a long story short, I told the Energy Advisory Committee, we discussed it. It was inappropriate for us, in the majority opinion, to discuss this any further, and it should be, what to the planning board and or the planning office. So, passing the baton on to that one.
Before you leave that, so what types of actions would you think are necessary?
It would be new zoning. Some communities are already providing new zoning ordinances. And said, if you're having these antennas, they've got to be concealed, or you've got to put them on a certain pole and doing something else. So it's aesthetically pleasing that you just don't let the license of the 5G put it wherever they want. And that's kind of a big concern that some members of the EAC had, and again, it was, in my opinion, and the majority opinion, inappropriate for us to discuss it further.
If I could just respond, I think it's a great point, and I think this goes to basically smaller and smaller, equipment that's being placed out there, more distributed, right? So, our typical vision, a long time ago, prior to my time being here, when the zoning ordinance was amended to add a section for wireless telecommunication facilities, typically you think of that as a tower, and nowadays it's a small thing that you put on telephone poles. So here, I think we maybe look to amend that particular section to try to cover as much ground as we could without running afoul of the federal agencies that have, provided some latitude for these entities to put their facilities up, but to Don's point, maybe make sure that at least in this national register historic area, they're hidden, so to speak, and that's the kind of thing we're seeing, whether it be in church or some other locations where they're trying to co-locate or hide, equipment, in some sort of a tower or something, as opposed to having it out, and exposed. There will be some situations, I think, based on the technology going where the probably we're not on the city council as well. And they facility companies found things that they want to run a telephone poles or public right of way. But to the extent that we can address under the zoning, I think it's a valid point. We should look at that. And maybe we can work together with what Andy is seeing. Although I think I agree with you, it's really more of a zoning, like more independent thing, unless there's a particular, define those evidence. I agree.
And the last, so that we can go home, is again on the energy advisory committee. They would like to see something where there's greater energy conservation and more net zero, et cetera. And we can't do that now because it's not allowed by the Massachusetts legislation. There's some other building codes that's not the purview of the planning board. But when it comes to special permits, can the planning board do something more stringent? And the answer, actually, there is some case law or precedent, such as Cambridge Drug Place, you can do it. This is a big step in my opinion, and I believe that the Energy Advisory Committee would like some time to come before you and discuss this. In addition, they started discussion with the resiliency committee, because the resiliency committee would also like to have certain wants or desires in some of these special permits. So I think they're going to be coordinated, and I think they're going to come before you and eventually also come before the city council on some of these items here. So I just wanted to give you, stay tuned for something on that. Now, to me, there is nothing, and again, this would have to be a planning board decision, to say the planning board could, for a reasonable sized project, to say, we would like you to provide voluntarily, provide this questionnaire or provide our answers to, did you do everything possible for energy conservation? Did you do some type of a life cycle cost analysis? What was your discount rate? Did you take into account rebates and the new Inflation Reduction Act, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? That to me is entirely possible, because you simply say, would you do it? They can say, no, thank you, go on to the next subject for discussion. And again, that would be up to the Energy Advisory Committee when they meet with you. So again, just heads up, not sure what they're going to do there. Thanks.
Just to build on that, I was in those conversations for the last few days, and I've been working with the Resiliency Committee on a questionnaire, and he has been too, about looking at site conditions and resilience and green infrastructure and so forth. And at some point, that committee is going to come to us as a planning board and ask us to be looking at an informational questionnaire, a checklist, similar to what Don is talking about from the energy point of view. And we're going to have to decide how much more we want to ask other applicants. But the benefit of the questionnaire is it may help get people thinking about things. So these may move in that direction, even where we haven't put the standards into our regulations, or even as the case of some of the building energy type things that Don's talking about, we don't, as a board, have authority except in very unique situations where there's special permit. So that's something that will be coming before us. We've been working on it for a year or so. It'll come when it comes.
If I could just supplement both of the comments, and generally speaking, I'm in support of all the sort of long range initiative for energy conservation for resiliency. Like both the idea of asking the questions of applicants and the questions about a little better, but also maybe at some point, obviously, amending the standards themselves, because where it actually compel certain things that are responsible one way or another. This goes a little bit to, there's a city ordinance that deals with public facilities that are done by the city, and the city has to basically show the city council, the project managers have to show the city council how much has been done to try to reach a net zero energy usage in the building. So we saw that with a net zero plan for the West End Fire Station, and a net zero for the Market Landing Park Visitor Building, although we don't have funding for that building just yet, it's designed to be net zero. So that's kind of the overall goal, and I think the essence here is we try to get the private sector to try to head that direction as well. With us, whether it be first asking the question, maybe later updating some of the standards. The one cautionary note, I guess I would say, is that I would not be surprised, depending on how much even just the questionnaire, forgetting the standards for a second. If we try to have questions that we add to our application, I would not be surprised if there's a party or two out there who might say, well, your 16-page, questionnaire requires X, Y, and Z, and is, onerous or is beyond the scope of what the board can, require the ordinance. And so that my suggestion there is that, if we're not getting into a debate about that, trying to keep it as simple as possible and reasonably, something that folks can do. Whereas if we want something more involved, we might need to consider the possibility of one, objection from some of those folks and representative developers, but two, maybe need to go back to city council and make it more clear whether the board has authority to compel, even, and I don't necessarily object this myself, but even when the board might be calling for information, not necessarily compelling a specific action, but to go to the point saying, tell us what you have done and walk us through that. And trying, even that I've seen folks sometimes object to. We actually had some time ago, I'm forgetting how long ago this point, but a couple years back, we made some adjustments on our application forms, trying to make it clear where certain things have to be provided so that we weren't in situations where the boards and meetings, and trying to not make it overly complicated by going to the city council and amending ordinance, but the application form itself and just clarify what's needed by the board. We even had, where the individual suspects say, well, we're concerned that that's onerous of the applicant. So my note there is that I support it. Concept just want to recognize the fact that it may be a balancing act where at a certain point we're crossing the threshold where we have, the private sector objecting to what we're asking for in the information, or maybe later objecting to regulations, and maybe needing, depending on where we are with that on that threshold, needing to go to the city council for amendment to the ordinances because there's an objection to or effectively exceeding its authority by compelling folks to do that or Z. But generally speaking, I support both initiatives.
Any questions on that? Just looking ahead at our coming meetings, the next meeting will be having this 21 weight going back to us. Do you think that will be, we want to pick up the discussion of the change to the ITIF ordinance? Do you think that it's reasonable to have some response in terms of analysis by that meeting, or would you like to have us wait for another later meeting?
I guess when we for instance analysis, and we talk about we've asked, there's a question we're asked about, like what are the vacant lots that could be developed versus things, what are the applications that we've received today, how much money did they actually provide to the city, obviously relatively small number of applications or dollar amount to the city for the IJF, some basic information like that.
Yeah,
we can circle back with or in meeting on the 15th. That's
okay, that's what it is.
We should be able to circle back with some summary of that information there. As far as it's sort of along the lines of what I'm trying to be speaking to, which is almost doing an analysis of a million different scenarios. That to me, I think the suggestion there almost seems to be, you can spend a year or two doing a study like that. I think here we're talking about, some basic information that might be helpful for your framework, but if you're trying to do an analysis of every square foot of every building in the downtown and how those things should be converted from residential to commercial, that's an onerous process. And would,
now, I guess I was sort of thinking about sort of what Jennifer was talking about is take Arthur Page and what happens if they want to convert from office. So we're going to take a couple of the case studies, say, what does this mean?
Sure. I don't know whether or not every board member here will feel satisfied that those are the exact samples we're looking for, but I do believe, I have confidence in Jennifer, they will be able to look through it. Maybe that's one right there that we just look right at. But to Jennifer's earlier point, look at that and say, here's what we think the result would actually result would be. Good or bad, or pros or cons. Here's what we think the result would be, and if we can think of a few others to pull out there. If you have suggestions, we're just happy to talk to the chair on it, but if it's suggestion for a particular locus, you can try to think about that, pull down with the full. But I think Jennifer was also correct in pointing out that it may not be as egregious a burden if folks are actually triggering more of a need for parking by the conversion to residential, whereas you might have gotten the impression tonight earlier that everything will be tagged because of that.
So it's reasonable to think that we could be wrapping this up at the next meeting.
If you're, I believe so, yes.
Do you know of any other applications in the coming building?
Not that I'm aware of, no. And there was a question there actually about the April.
Right. So we are going to be, as everybody probably knows, we're seeing short-term revenue that's coming to us. And we're going to have a joint public hearing with Planning and Development Committee and probably Committee of the Whole, I guess, on April 19th. Correct? April 19th.
Correct. We are, based on the feedback from counselors, we are now expecting, we always try to, by the way, use the planning board's regular meeting nights for the zoning hearings. Because all nine of you, or eight of you are expected to generally be here. So we asked the three city council members to join the planning board on that night. So rather than creating another night for a hearing. So the 19th seems to be the preferred day, partly because the 5th is the first day I think of Passover.
Right, so that was the next question is, the 5th being Passover. Are we going? No.
We try to avoid holidays, of course, I'm sorry, just a bit,
Right,
sort of bit, but it may be beneficial here or logical to cancel it as opposed to having it be.
Or, yeah, or if we can. We don't want to, we're trying to have a late vote on the 19th because we know that's going to be a big meeting. So if we can bump something later to the first meeting, May, or if we can squeeze something in on the 15th. Of March.
Understood.
Yeah, that would be the thing. So then we'd be able to possibly cancel.
I believe that's going to be possible, and I don't have people without issue, and understood the dynamics there, so we'll try to coordinate that accordingly. So I guess I would say anticipate the zoning here, the short-term monthly, but again, another round on, I think, you know, we're in a better situation now, generally speaking, in this scenario, it's something that 5th or 6th time, we should try it, but after a lot of dialogue, the city councils had about this in particular, we'll take it up again on the 19th, we'll aim to cancel the meeting on the 5th. And we'll shuffle things around the dates before and after, so we're not necessarily overlapping on the short term of this discussion.
Do you have anything else?
Sorry, there was one thing I wanted to mention. The one thing I wanted to mention was that I did get word late today that the legislature, the governor had given an extension in 2025, I forget the exact date, but 2025 for the vote meetings allowance. So even though at this point we're doing it hybrid, essentially in person with the remote access, if we needed to, for any reason, or if we wanted to, like some of our other boards have preferred to do, given the pandemic, they have been some of the boards have been having remote only meetings, so like the preservation committee is meeting remote only. Tomorrow night, it's been very efficient. The group, it's certainly effective, but here in the planning board want to. The ZBA, the city council, the planning board are the ones we primarily see doing it as hybrid, and probably won't end up saying that way, but just let you know, we would have the latitude to have a fully remote meeting as well as an in-person meeting or a hybrid meeting going to 2025.
Actually, one thing that occurred to me tonight. It's a very frustrating meeting tonight, and I wonder whether it's possible for us. I mean, I recognize that some of our board members sometimes can't make it to a meeting, but I wonder if we could be less flexible with applicants, because several times I couldn't hear what people were saying. It was just the engineers.
In terms of them being remote.
And in terms of them being remote, I would like to help them.
Yeah, that's a great point. I can talk with Kayla. I know she's had a little bit more dialogue with this particular meeting agenda, and so forth. But I certainly told people, and I think that the two of us can try to echo more strongly than anybody we're trying to do. I wouldn't necessarily say we could include them from, just remotely, but I would definitely say, look, the bottom line is, it's hard to hear folks, and you're gonna run into problems representing your clients if there's any communication issues. It's certainly much easier if you're in the room than it is to hear say swear, somebody's remote. So we can certainly let them know that it's in their own interest, and then we strongly suggest that they be in person at the board because it prevents any delays or lack of.
It also seemed that several people couldn't understand what I was saying.
Yes, and in both directions. Typically, what we have found is the audio, everything sort of works fine. Jarek is speaking, I would say, except that the audio in the room here, sometimes we have problems hearing folks at home, but that actually ends up being easier. I think most of the problems that I have seen have been folks at home have a really hard time hearing, whether it's the council chambers or hearing what's happening in the room, dialogue, and that's why we try to amplify voices, but unfortunately, I've been trying for several years now since the pandemic, trying to advocate for better equipment in our public hearing rooms built in like these cameras, and we're still using the temporary equipment we've got, which if you hadn't noticed earlier tonight, this happening to us all the time, but the equipment actually almost didn't work at one point. It was starting up, and we run into these issues periodically, and I'm trying to avoid the planning office staff, never mind other departments, because there's so many meetings. have to act as IT people, just problem solve things that aren't really, our bailiwick, but this equipment is kind of mediocre, and so my goal, I guess, would be to have the free primary meeting space we have computers like this, have built-in equipment, so we don't have these audio issues, but for now, to your point, we should probably have at least all the applicants and the representatives in the room.
Does anybody else have anything that they would like to bring up? Want to go home?
Sounds fine.
I just love this. I'd accept the motion to adjourn.
We'll move to adjourn.
A second.
I'll second it.
Okay, final roll call of the night. Alden,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes.
and I vote yes. on that. Good night, everybody.
Nice later today. Sure.
Okay.